Hey everybody, Texas Stroker here, Lance's Performance Shop, LoneStarMopars.com. Welcome back to the Ram Revival. We got the motor out of the truck and it is time to do some fun stuff. It's time to start introducing you to some of the parts I have selected to fix or upgrade our current issues with the truck. So this is the first part that I brought in for the truck, and for a good reason. Now what this is an intake. Obviously it's going to replace the Kegger. That's right, we're getting rid of the Kegger. Why would you get rid of the Kegger? Okay, well here's the issue. It's actually kind of a cool manifold. Aesthetically it's called a Kegger because it looks like a keg, you know, shaved in half, if you will. A lot of people refer to it as a beehive. You could do some stuff and kind of make it a neat looking manifold, particularly in a car. Now the issue is with the Kegger, it makes great low end torque, and that's about all. Now the saving grace there is in your big heavy truck, low end torque is what you want. That's what a lot of people will be 100% content with. Could it be improved upon? Absolutely. But there's one fatal flaw with the Kegger. Now it is easily remedied. I wouldn't say easily, but I mean it is able to be fixed and corrected, if you will. But essentially it is an aluminum intake, which is awesome. We want that. Lightweight, savings, you know, heat transfer, all the good, you know, positives we can associate with it. Problem comes with the plenum pan. With an old school car, you know, like on a 440, we've got, you know, the runners come up to the carb pad and everything, and you just got that nice aluminum base at the bottom that covers the valley, right? The valley, of course, would be where you've got your lifters and push rods and oil slinging around. Don't want that exposed. So with the Kegger, keep in mind this is the Magnum, being a fuel injection engine. All the intake is concerned with is getting air down to the injectors thrown into the combustion chambers. So what they did, they have a nice design. You know, the keg is going to generate low end torque that we want. You can modify the runners. There's all kinds of stuff you can do to improve it slightly. But the biggest issue is that plenum plate is open at the bottom, and so what they did is they just bolt a plate up to the bottom side of your Kegger. I'll try to show you one here at some point in this video, but the problem with that, it works fine initially. Over time, you know, as your oil gets in from the PCV and everything, you get to a point where you're just going to blow the gasket out. Again, heat cycles, steel and aluminum. You've heard me in many upgrade and modification videos. Why do I like to run aluminum pans on a transmission? The transmission housing is aluminum. It's going to seal better. If you've got the steel pan on your aluminum trans, you've got a temperature differential. Over time, that wreaks havoc on gaskets. In the case of the plenum, you've got your steel pan bolted up to the bottom of your intake that you can't see and you don't even know is there. And what will happen is as you heat and have the cool cycles over and over and over again, that gasket becomes brittle or it gets oil soaked, some combination of the two. It'll blow out. When that gasket gets blown out, you've got vacuum, you know, in your intake, and so oil gets pulled in. As the oil gets pulled in, depending on the degree of failure and how long it's left in that state, it will become worse. It will deteriorate rapidly. It's essentially a deal. Your truck could be humming along just fine. You're taking a road trip because it's never something in town, you know, you're like a couple hundred miles in, and all of a sudden, you know, you're kind of like, man, the truck's kind of running rough, and you stop and you're like, I'll just check the oil, it's probably nothing. And you check the oil and it's like a quart low, or it's way below the, you know, caution fill line, right? You're out of the crosshatch completely. So you got oil in your truck, you dump it in, and you think no big deal, and you trek off, and then in 2-3 hours you have to stop so your girlfriend can go to the bathroom. You think, oh, I'll just check the oil again, it's probably nothing. Same thing, you're like a quart down this time, or you've like closed in and you're like, hey, we are burning oil, what's the deal? Well, it's your plenum pan that has failed. It's not something that you really avoid, it's just a matter of not if, but when it's going to fail. The one on my truck hadn't really failed yet, shockingly. Typically it's around 60,000 miles, but you got to realize I drive the truck all the time. I live in a small town, school was close by, college was close, work was close, friends are close, you know, going out to eat is close. So despite driving it all the time, I still haven't hit 60,000. Between 60 and 90 is typically when these things go, and when they go, it's not peaceful, it's not gradual, it's just you got to add quarts of oil, you know, every couple hundred miles in some cases. Obviously at some point in time, the expense of doing that, the hassle of doing that, makes you want to fix it. Hughes, among other people, you know, you can actually just cut your own too if you want to, but you cut that same plate out of aluminum instead of steel, bolt it back up, you should be good to go. Eventually it'll probably fail, maybe the gasket gets soaked, but it's not going to be as frequent of an occurrence as it is with the steel plate from the factory. That's really the fatal flaw of the Kegger, which again you can remedy, but this will completely eliminate that. This is also, in my opinion, going to look better. It should perform better across the board. There's lots of debate on this. Lots of people say it does, lots of people say it doesn't. Ultimately, you've got to think, what are your end goals for the truck? Are you going to be racing it? Are you going to be going through a river of mud every weekend? Is it just to get you from A to B? Is it like your daily driver, so your, you know, cool, clean, late model stuff doesn't get beat up or keyed in the parking lot? You have to ask yourself what you're going to do and what you expect performance-wise from your vehicle, and proceed accordingly. In my case, I don't want to deal with the Kegger. I'm going to give this a go. If I lose a ton of low-end torque, I'll throw the Kegger back on. You know, it's something that's not a permanent change. You can always cycle back and forth. But this is from Hughes. It is cast by Edelbrock. It's essentially an Edelbrock Air Gap for a Magnum, which you could totally pick up. It's just, this one is custom tailored to work with the factory induction, which would be a 2-barrel throttle body. So I've got the box opened up, a ton of packaging out of the way. We get our stickers, and those are always good for 5 to 10 horsepower, you know, depending on your DA, right? Something that I do like, and I have to give credit to Hughes for, they have updated the instructions. As people were getting these, they were gun-ho, and they're like, man, you know, this was a pain in the butt, couldn't do this, they didn't even tell you have to do this, and shave and adjust and everything. They've updated the instructions, and they also include, as you can see here, full color instructions, parts breakdown, everything. That is always appreciated. Try not to get that dirty with my gloves, because I'll have to consult it. Another nice touch. Now, the biggest, I'd say honestly, the biggest complaint with this is the price. Price point for this is $640. That is steep, I will be the first to admit. However, the Magnum Air Gap to begin with is fairly expensive as well. Now, you could probably come in and re-drill like an LA one. I mean, I've got an Air Gap sitting here on the Duster, old school style, right? But you do get a couple of extras, and that is worth noting. We've got this huge gasket set, so you can see right there, we've got, you know, water neck, you can see the throttle body, you can see carb pad, you can see the intake, the little ends. So essentially, I guess this would be basically an intake kit, right? Let's see here. Dodge truck, let's see. Probably the big number, so MS16292. That is included with the price, which I think is nice. It's not like they're just completely screwing you over, right? In here, I think, is going to be all of our brass fittings, right? This, when I say it's designed for the trucks and everything, it is. They include everything that you're going to need to kind of equip this and have all your standoffs, your heater hose, your vacuum connections, your T's, everything along those lines. We'll open that up shortly, get a better look at it. This right here, you will note a couple of things. Number one, we could come and we could bolt a carburetor to that. Okay, but this is drilled out for injectors. Those 2 holes there, here, and here, there's 8 total. Those are for your injectors. Early in the game, there are issues with that. You could use the stock injectors, but it kind of looked wonky. You had to like custom shim everything with washers. It would work, but it wasn't really, you know, like the aesthetics you would want at the price point you've already invested. I've got something we're going to take a look at next that is going to eliminate that, be a huge aesthetic upgrade. Not necessarily going to do a thing for us performance-wise, but it's going to make the installation hopefully much, much more simple, and it's definitely 100% going to look better. But what this is right here, this is an adapter. This is another good chunk of change. Granted, it's not the fanciest thing in the world. We'll open it up in a second, unless mine is somehow miraculously better looking than the others. This adapts the 4-barrel to the 2-barrel, so you can run your stock throttle body. You know, if it's just, I hate my Kegger, put this on, you can go stock. If you're like throwing heads and a cam in it, you might bump up, do a modified throttle body. If you're going full-on stroker, you're going to want something that flows a ton of air. Again, it just kind of depends what you're doing, but this is included, and you could probably expect to spend $50, $100 or so, kind of depending on what this is, what route you go. I may be trying to replace this with something, again, a little bit more stylistically appealing to me. I'm going to set that on the drill press and pray that it doesn't fall. Let's go up top, and then we'll just run the risk of knocking the chuck key off, right? So this is the bones. This is the bread and the butter. This is the money maker, the literal expense on the entire thing. This, again, if it looks like an air gap to you, that's because it is. This is cast by Edelbrock. Edelbrock doesn't hide that. Hughes doesn't hide that. If you email Edelbrock and say, hey, you know, do you have a Magnum-based air gap I can use with my fuel injection? They will tell you to buy this. If you email Hughes and say, hey, what do I do? They're going to say, use this. If you go intermediary, you know, like a Magnum tuner, a builder, some of them will say, yeah, well, let's do this. Some of them will say, I'm going to drill something for you. Others will say, get the air gap. It's prepped by Hughes. So this is the route I decided to go, so it is what we're going to take a look at. I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to open up the fittings and accessories thing. I'm going to open up the adapter. I'm going to get this out of the box and on the bench, and we'll step over there. If I remember, we'll try to compare this to the Kegger so you can kind of get an aesthetic sight line, and then I'll flip the Kegger so you can see the belly pan that I'm talking about, in the rare event that you don't know what I'm referencing. So give me a little bit of time, and we will be right back. And there she is, boys, one of the best pairs of scissors ever. No, not really, but actually, yeah, these are great scissors. But distracting from that is this on the bench. First thing I noticed is how light it is. I don't know if it's because we just lugged the assembled cylinder heads, which are also light, but this was not near as heavy as you would think it'd be given the size, so that's awesome. But I've got the adapter on. As best I remember, I think the tab's going to go to the back towards the distributor. Could be wrong, but I think we're correct there. I haven't read the instructions, just winged this because it's just a product showcase, right? So essentially where we're at with this is our throttle body adapter, and I've got to say it's not near as bad of a piece as I thought it was. It does match, you know, the cast finish and everything. I think you could dress that up maybe with something billet. And that may be something we try to do, but the main thing, the big advantage of using this, I think it would put us in the right geometry. Obviously the Kegger, if you've ever looked at the Kegger uninstalled, it's like a miniature tunnel ram almost, right? Thing's got some elevation, to say the least. But right here, this is our adapter plate, so we're going to get it off and set to the side, because that's not what we're concerned with here. We want to check out the intake itself. So, if I'm thinking correctly, the Edelbrock number, what was it? Was it 75, I think, and then 5409 for Hughes. But nonetheless, you got a part number back here, which I think is Hughes specific, and then you've got Hughes here, where you would typically, you know, see Edelbrock in that region. You can kind of see how it's drilled out, tapped. Looks to be a pretty nice finish. Again, this is something Edelbrock's going to handle, so that's a selling point. Gives you kind of peace of mind. Sometimes on the small blocks you kind of have to grind this a little bit for distributor clearance. Don't know if that's an issue on the Magnum or not. That would be this area here. This would be your distributor, and then this area you'd have your oil pressure sensor, etc. We've got our bosses here where we can run our studs through, or bolts I should say, to the heads. Right up here we've got a pretty nice, there's a little gash in that on the water neck. I don't know that you can see it. If I slide her over a bit, kind of like where it looks like there's something funky, there is, and hopefully that doesn't impact sealing. I don't really feel it, so maybe it's just kind of a slight gash of some sort. But anyway, if we were to flip this over, or sideways I should say, the air gap is a dual plane intake. What do we mean by that? Well, if you know, there's this divider in the middle, and if I put my finger here, it's like stopping right there, right? I can hinge and touch the floor. If I do the same thing here, I can't. I have to, we just now touched it, my whole hand's in there. That's two levels, right? It's going to provide dual planes of intake induction, if you will. So picture your throttle body up here, you step on the gas, it opens up, it drops some air in. In theory, that's great, particularly for carburetor. There's been a lot of discussion recently, the last couple of years I should say, about, say, if we were putting this on the Duster, just a dual plane intake, it may not be your best choice with throttle body induction. But you got to think back to the Magnum. What does it say? It's MPFI. You're like, what is that? That's not throttle body, right? No, it's not. That's multi-port fuel injection, which is awesome. That's what we have here. So realistically, I don't have much concern there. Now, if you're going crazy, all out, making my Ram 1500 Street Beast the fastest thing there's ever been, you're probably going to modify this. You're probably not. You're probably going to send it out to someone like Wilson, and they do some really trick crud to it. But for everyone else, this is pretty good out of the box. I don't think there's much we're going to have to worry about. Keep in mind, this bag right here has a whole lot of random stuff, okay? You got tons of brass fittings they're going to thread in, you know, for vacuum lines and hoses and everything. Everywhere you see like these steel tubes, those are going to be spacers. They're going to be standoffs for your accessories, whether that be something towards the front or just a bracket to bolt up to. The instructions, I did skim them. They're very detailed. There's some bolts. There's a lot of vacuum caps. There's your brackets for your fuel injectors, which we're not going to need. I won't say too much. Right here, this bag here, the white one, that's actually Mopar intake manifold bolts, which is super cool. So I mean, it's not, yeah, this is expensive. I'll agree 100% with that. I think they'd sell a ton more of them if it was priced a little lower. But at the same time, you're getting roughly, like, what does Edelbrock charge? Probably $350, somewhere in that range, maybe a little bit more. I think if you do the crazy powder coats, it gets like 500-ish in and of itself. But this is kind of taken to the next level. It's got all your fuel injection stuff handled. It's got all your standoffs. It includes the hardware, the gaskets, which, some people may hate the gaskets and run their own brand. Everyone's got their preferences, but the bottom line, it is at least included. Again, that adapter, you could factor that in at around $100. Probably a little less, but we'll just say 100. So if we're running with 350 and that is 450, and then all the miscellaneous hardware, we'll just say 50, you're up to 500. So you are kind of paying a bit of a premium for this sucker. But it's set up, it'll bolt right up to your factory set. If all you're doing is pulling your kegger and going to throw this on, it will work. If you're building, kind of just throwing heads and cams in it because you're sick of the belly pan, you're sick of the heads cracking, you're in there anyway, and you say, well, water pump's off, I'm just putting a cam in it and a timing set because I have to do that too. This ties in beautifully there. If you're building a 390 or a 408, this works there. If you're trying to turn your Dakota into like, a 10-second street truck, this will work in that application. It's about the broadest range of scopes that you could have from an intake. Particularly, you got to realize the Magnum has been underserved its entire existence. Chrysler didn't do enough for it, in my opinion, when it was new and current and relevant. They didn't follow it up after the fact. They didn't offer near the aftermarket support that they should have from the factory in terms of Mopar Performance gear and goodies. What they did offer, you've got to realize, most of that stuff is like impossible to find now. If I came in and I wanted to buy an M1 intake, guess where I have to get it? Not direct from Chrysler, not from a distributor. I have to go to eBay and get it used and hope that it isn't like total junk. If I want to get the Mopar Performance headers for a Magnum, where do I have to go? Swap meets and eBay. It's not something that's still in the catalog is what I'm trying to say. So not only was it underserved, but then it's like essentially abandoned, which leaves everyone kind of scraping and scrambling, right? That's where companies like Hughes, Hypotech, a couple of others, that kind of have fill-in items here and there, are very much appreciated, because without them, we would have nothing. We would all be sitting here, with files and hacksaws inside of our keggers, trying to make things happen and cutting out, one guy gets like a 4x8 sheet of aluminum and he figures out he can make, 28 belly pans for the Plenum gasket, and he'd be selling them, and then you'd have to try to get a group buy going so you could get one, and it would just be a nightmare. So this is very much appreciated. Again, Edelbrock, once upon a blue moon, they did a little bit more too. You could even get their like tri-Y headers, if I'm thinking correctly. There's a lot of companies that used to make stuff for the Magnum that have just bailed. They've stopped production, destroyed the tooling, didn't want to fix the core boxes, whatever the case may be. So anything we can get is appreciated, and I still believe that the Magnum had a lot more potential than anyone ever tapped. I guess it's just a situation. Chrysler was ready to move on to the Hemi. They still, from a manufacturer standpoint, I think they could do a lot more. I think I could do a really good job working at Mopar Performance. I think I'd sell a crud ton of parts easily. It's a shame to kind of see the price points on late model Mopar stuff, which are absurd, and then to know people are paying them, and then to know that the factory is missing out on them. They've stepped up a little bit, across the years, kind of like their stage 1, 2, and 3, but think back, how many people do you know that actually use those parts? I don't know of locally there's no one, but you know, nationwide and people I know elsewhere, very, very few. You know, warranty stuff be danged, they're not doing it. And at least they're doing more than I think they did for the Magnum. But you know, like the Mopar PCM, they never even made one for an '01. It's like, oh yeah, well here's 2000, let's redesign the truck. You know, we're gonna put a Hemi in it, sell a ton of them. And that's cool, but man, you know, you don't forsake your past, in my opinion. It's kind of one of those deals, you know, like you can still get some stuff for a 4.4, although they're kind of, you know, phasing a lot of that stuff out too. So it's sad to see. I would do things differently, and I think I could certainly generate a lot of revenue for the company that they're completely missing out on. But that's just me, some random guy in Texas. So, you know, this though, the Hughes Intake, super, super nice. I gotta say, loving it right out of the box. Let's flip her over before we brag too much. Take a gander here. We'll bring you on this side. Again, this is a nice finish here. The ports here, could you gasket match that? Absolutely. Could you clean it up? Yes. This is another thing I think Hughes and Edelbrock would both benefit from doing. Just offer like a stage 1 cleanup. Don't make it expensive. Don't be a jerk and overcharge for this. Just basically get, you know, the surface smooth. That's all you'd have to do. I realize you can't see it super well because of it's not really the lighting, it's just all the light is hitting here and reflecting. But again, it's just that feels like sand, it feels like the surface. What I'm going to do is flip this over, and this is the money maker right here, okay? This is the bottom. This is what is going to sit in the valley. This is what's going to cover up, you know, your lifters and your push rods and everything. And if you note, this is kind of old school. This is just like it would be on the Duster. In fact, it's the exact same as it would be on the Duster. The catch is, instead of this being a plate that's bolted, a steel plate bolted to an aluminum intake with a gasket in between those, sandwiching it, you know, keeping your oil from consuming multiple quarts of oil as you drive. This is a cast piece of aluminum. It's part of the intake. Issue eliminated 100%, which is awesome. So that's a huge selling point in and of itself. But this is the intake I have opted to go with. Again, I've got high hopes for it. Maybe too high. You know, you don't ever want to overhype something and then feel disappointed. But at the same time, just knowing that I can drive with this and we won't have to worry about the plenum gasket blowing out. Because I gotta say, it's a fairly easy fix, but the time invested in dismantling the front accessories and all that you have to do to pull the intake, and then in my case with the truck being lifted and having to drape into the engine bay, it's more of a headache than it's worth. And that to me kind of is where what I think they should sell this for versus what they sell it for, and then I factor in me having to do all those things, and I think, yeah, well, let's pull the trigger, make it happen. Right there though, we've got the Edelbrock number, which I believe is a 7579, but you can't see that. It's this one right there. Now you can see it. I think that would be their Magnum part number. Don't hold me to that, but then again, I think for Hughes it's this one back here, the 5409. It's one of these things, it's hard for me to get good angles. You know, I can't really fit it all in the camera scope here. But I think all I'm gonna do now is, I don't know if I want to set this by the Kegger or if I just want to show you the Kegger. I'm going to show you the Kegger, and this may or may not make a guest appearance. So let me set that up and we will wrap the video up. My apologies if the fan is too loud, but honestly I don't care because it's hot and I forgot I even had the thing on over here. So this is the Kegger. It's taped up. It's not in its typical glory. It's kind of dirty, right? Got some hoses and clamps set on top of her. But that's essentially the aesthetic of what would be on top of your Magnum engine, right? You got the giant, literal giant. That thing is big. It's really big when you get right down to it. But you got the water neck up there. You've got all your bosses, the bolts and everything, your vacuum ports, the black rails for the fuel injection, the plastic crossover. I've taped off, you know, the bores where we'd have the throttle body. Throttle body's in a box over there. I want you to think, like, would you rather have that on top of your motor? This is just aesthetics. We're not talking performance. Squeaky tripod. Or would you rather have that? I went ahead and threw it down. That's about the only place I could get it. Didn't want it down there in the gunk. I've been cleaning that inspection plate. But that's essentially what we will be going from. We're going to install the Hughes Air Gap, and it's going to replace the Kegger. So with that said, that's kind of where we stand, what we're doing. I could flip her over for you and show you the belly pan, but I've got all the bolts and stuff in there. You've seen the belly pan, you know what it looks like. I'm going to call it good. You came to see the new intake, not the old one. So I'm content with that. Now the disdain of everyone that wanted to see it. But nonetheless, this is something I'm pretty excited about, looking forward to getting it on, seeing how it performs. And that intake right over there, now it doesn't squeak, will be going in place of the Kegger to there. Dun, 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 on top of a Magnum, right? Good stuff, good times. But before I drop the camera, I'm going to tighten this sucker back up. I do hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned a little something. If you run Hughes Air Gap, what do you think of it? Why did you buy it? Did you buy it to eliminate the Plenum pan? Did you buy it for performance? Did you buy it because your 2000 Dodge is the fastest in the country? What was your logic? What were you going for? Did it live up to your expectations? Has it exceeded them? Are there any issues with it? Do you regret it? Did you switch back? That's the type of real-world, first-hand feedback I'm looking for, because not only is that beneficial for me to know, it also helps every single person that is on the fence between switching between these. Biggest knock on this one is honestly just the price. I feel like if they could get that down to like $520-ish, somewhere in there, I think with everything included, and the adapter plate for the 2-barrel, I feel like people would say, hey, I'm going to pull the trigger. As it is, it's kind of like you're either a performance man, performance chick, or I'm sick of the Plenum pan, or just like a project of some sort. But that is what it is. That's where I'm going to end this one. Let me know your thoughts on that sucker. We got a lot of cool stuff coming for the Ram Revival. You're going to get to see some more of the parts we brought in for her. And I do hope you enjoy. So with that said, Ram Revival, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, at Ram Revival. If I haven't populated that stuff when you see this, my apologies. I do have it. Otherwise, at Lone Star Mopars, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, website, once again, LoneStarMopars.com. If you have not subscribed, I encourage you to do so. That will keep you up to date with all the latest on the Ram Revival. Ram Revival, again, we should have those videos midweek, typically Wednesday for you. Tool stuff, other automotive content scattered in, tools usually being on Saturday. But for all intents and purposes, at this point in time, we should have quite a few more Ram Revival videos headed your way. So hope you enjoy it. Hopefully you learn a little something. And if nothing else, I will catch you back here next week for more action from the shop.